It may have taken 4 episodes, but for the first time in what feels like forever, we've got an anime-related episode of Free-for-All. Now, when deciding on what animes to choose for this first episode, I was really stuck for choice, since I wanted to make sure it was an anime for one of my 3 favourite genres, sci-fi, mecha, or fantasy. But I wasn't completely sure which genre I should go with and which ones I should leave out. Luckily, the 2 anime I have competing against each other today are not only representatives of all 3 genres, but they're also very well received and loved animes, as well as being some of the most unique and original animes in terms of premise and storyline, those being none other than Code Geass and Guilty Crown. Both of these animes are some of the most loved animes in the sci-fi, fantasy and mecha genre respectively, and to this day they are still held in high regard for being incredibly unique and portraying a lot of original ideas and themes. But which of the 2 is better? Well, I feel now's the time to find out, as for the first anime episode of Free-for-All, these 2 animes go head to head in order to see which one shall be crowned king and the other guilty. How this episode and other anime related episodes are going to work is that I will be judging these anime on 5 different categories: story and main characters, side characters, animation, art style and action scenes, music/soundtrack, and finally structure and pacing. Now, these categories will be used as a base for all anime related episodes, but depending on the factors of the animes in question, I will include extra categories that I feel are relevant when comparing them. As always, I will give the winner of each round 2 points and second place only gets 1 point, and the anime with the most points at the end is the winner. For the record, this is just my own opinion, and I will say that both these animes are at the very least good animes, so don't get the idea that the loser of this round is going to be deemed crap or not worth watching. But I know that you want to see which of these animes are better, since on the internet there is no middle ground, as sad as it is. For there can only be one winner at the end of the day. And with all that cleared up, I must now bear the burden of pissing off either one of these fan bases, and this burden shall be with me throughout every episode of Free-for-All. People are going to see me as a monster, or just plain evil. Well then, to defeat evil, I shall become an even greater evil, for I am the one who does not like the Tigrex! Now for the first round, I've decided to judge both the story and main character as a single category, since for one thing, these 2 often go hand in hand, as the events that take place or the way the story unfolds is often tied to the main character's actions and journey as a whole. Not only that, but I feel it was better to judge the supporting characters in their own separate category instead of including every single character at one time. With that said, both Code Geass and Guilty Crown have similar stories in terms of overall premise and the events that unfold, as well as portraying similar themes and ideas present throughout both anime. Code Geass takes place in an alternate timeline, where the Empire of Britannia has conquered the nation of Japan and has renamed the country and its people as 11s. The story follows our main character, Lelouch v Britannia, the former Prince of Britannia who was exiled along with his sister Nunnally after the death of their mother, and his sister was crippled and blinded. In the beginning, Lelouch is a popular yet withdrawn high school student until one day he gets caught up in an incident involving the Japanese resistance, and during the chaos he stumbles upon a mysterious girl by the name of CC, or C2. CC then gives Lelouch the power known as Geass, which allows him to command whoever he makes direct eye contact with to obey whatever he says. With this, Lelouch takes on the alias of the masked vigilante Zero, and using his power, he forms a resistance movement known as the Black Knights. With these tools at his disposal, Lelouch makes it his goal to not only overthrow the Britannian Empire, but also to find out who's responsible for his mother's death, and to create a world where his sister Nunnally can find happiness. Guilty Crown is set in an alternate future where an event known as Lost Christmas caused a biological hazard known as the Apocalypse virus to spread throughout Japan. In order to contain the virus, Japan sought out the help of the GHQ, who successfully contained the outbreak at the cost of Japan's independence. The story follows our main character and high school student Shu Oma, who one day stumbles upon a girl named Inori. However, their meeting is cut short when the GHQ take Inori prisoner, but not before Shu follows the coordinates left by her robot to a resistance group known as Funeral Parlor, who fight to free Japan from GHQ's dominance. Once there, Shu meets Guy, the head of Funeral Parlor, who asks him to protect a mysterious vial, but soon afterwards the GHQ show up and engage Funeral Parlor in an all-out battle. During the chaos, Shu attempts to rescue Inori, and the vial shatters, revealing itself to be the Void Genome, which Shu inherits and gives him the ability to use people's voids, in this case their psyche, in physical form, such as swords in Inori's case. With this new power in his hand, Shu makes it his goal to become the ultimate weapon of Funeral Parlor and free Japan from the GHQ, but more for the purpose of keeping the Nori safe. Both of these anime have similar premise and themes surrounding their stories, such as oppression, freedom, morals battling against ideologies, and so on. Not to mention, both of these animes have really unique and original concepts to them that help them to stand out amongst most other anime and make something that is altogether original and memorable. In terms of which is better though, I'm giving the first round to Code Geass. This is mainly for two reasons. One, the way the story progresses and the narrative at large, and two, the main character. While I admit Guilty Crown has the more interesting premise in my opinion, and I really like the concept of using voice and how it not only leads to some really interesting fight scenes, but also reveals more about each character by doing so little, the most interesting part about Guilty Crown is all in its backstory. The events surrounding Lost Christmas and the Apocalypse virus are by far the most interesting parts of the story, and the episodes focusing on those are some of the best parts of the anime. But the main narrative isn't nearly as interesting, since most of it's just to do with Shu trying to fit in with the members of Funeral Parlor, and every episode is more about using a new voice to overcome each obstacle. Which isn't bad, mind you, and the second half of the series certainly gets you more involved in the story. But overall, Guilty Crown's narrative does its job, but unless it's about the backstory, it doesn't leave that much of an impact on you. And while Code Geass' narrative isn't perfect, since there are often twists in the story which come out of nowhere, and often feel out of place or sometimes just completely bullshit, the narrative as a whole keeps you engaged from start to finish, and the story is interesting throughout the entire 50 episode run. Then there's the case of Guilty Crown's ending, but I'll save that for the final segment. Concerning the main character, without a doubt, Lelouch completely shits all over Shu in just about every way. Lelouch is easily one of the most complex, interesting, and well-written characters in just about any anime, hell, storytelling as a whole. Much like Light Yagami from Death Note, what makes Lelouch such a great character is just how many layers of depth there are to his personality and character development over the course of the series. Since from the get-go, Lelouch is cold, calculating, sophisticated, very clever, and incredibly manipulative. Lelouch believes that as long as the ends justify the means, no methods or tactics are morally wrong or unjustified, as he does some pretty horrible things during Code Geass that often paint him as a villain despite being a main character. However, I always consider Lelouch to be more of an anti-hero, since you see various sides to the Lelouch that show that he feels remorse for his actions, as well as his end goal being seen as somewhat noble, and that there are sides to him that are much lighter and warmer than what he's normally like. Much like Esdeath, what makes Lelouch such a great character is that you see so many sides of him in just about every light that makes a character interesting and memorable. He can be cold and bitter, but also warm and caring. He can be arrogant and stubborn, but also considerate and remorseful. He can be evil and corrupt, but also selfless and honourable. And as such, Lelouch has become not only one of my favourite anime characters, but one of my favourite characters of all time. Shu Oma doesn't even come close to being nearly as interesting or complex as Lelouch. This is mainly due to the fact that Shu falls into the ever-growing category of main character with no personality, often regarded as generic horror protagonist or just boring male protagonist. This type of character is a character who seems to have next to no personality and yet has girls practically licking his feet, and this is sadly a growing trend in anime since it makes it easy for the viewer to insert themselves into the shoes of the main character so that it feels like they're the main character, similar to an avatar in a video game. Examples of characters like this are Ayato from Asterix War, Kazuya from Freezing, and of course, Kirito from Sword Art Online. Shu is very much one of these characters since for the most part Shu really isn't that interesting and more often than not only serves as a way to use voids and win battles for Funeral Parlor. He doesn't have much character outside of being rather absent-minded and an overall nice guy, and most of the time people just end up using him for his void rather than actually caring about him. With that said, Shu has something most boring male characters don't have in anime: character development. Yeah, surprisingly enough, Shu actually goes through character development during the second half of the series, as after a certain incident causes him to become incredibly bitter and otherwise cold and brooding, he turns into an otherwise dictator who controls people through the use of the most powerful voice he can find. And towards the end of the series, he learns to become more of a leader and that he shouldn't rely on people to do everything for him, or sometimes tries to do everything himself, but rather work together in order to achieve the same goal. While this doesn't make him nearly as interesting or complex as Lelouch, it's at least something, and give the anime credit, they actually make their protagonist grow as a character and change for the better, which is something some animes don't seem to do very well. But overall, while Guilty Crown has the more interesting premise and backstory, Code Geass has a much stronger narrative and a very strong main character to complement it, so the winner of the first round is Code Geass. When it comes to the supporting cast, both of these animes have a very large cast of characters and an overall strong cast of characters to boot. They all have their own unique identities, personalities, goals and motivations, which help to add a sense of moral grey to both narratives and make the world seem more alive. Code Geass has a very large cast of characters, and for the most part these characters are either hit or miss for me, in the sense that there are some characters in Code Geass I really like, but there are also characters I really hate. Overall, I'd say there are more good characters in Code Geass than there are bad ones, both major and minor. Characters I like are people like CC, who I find have a very interesting and tragic backstory, as well as some very strong arcs throughout the series. Cullen, who is a very strong character, and probably one of the more well-developed ones. Euphemia, since I think she's a very lovely and very sweet character, as well as being a very active character in the story despite being a princess. Cornelia, who is a fucking badass, and other characters like Guilford, Ogi, Jeremiah, Kaguya, Tamaki, Schneisel, Mao, Dalton, Valletta, Lloyd and Cecile, while not being the most complex characters, are characters you remember for what they do, and they all leave an impact on you despite their limited screen time. With that said, Code Geass has some characters I can't fucking stand. First and foremost, Suzaku, who despite being one of the main characters and someone I actually liked throughout most of season 1, just ended up getting on my nerves later on, being one of those characters who's seemingly perfect at everything he does, and during season 2 I fucking hated this dude, since he was such a douche and I wanted to punch him in the face long before Carlin did. Then there's other characters like Rival, Nina and Vivi who I just can't stand, and the worst of them all, Rolo, who is my most hated character in the series, for being such an evil and otherwise annoying little dipshit who I can't even stand to look at. And after what he did to a certain character, which I won't spoil here, he has become one of my most hated anime characters. Guilty Crown doesn't have as many characters as Code Geass, but these characters often get more character development despite the series being shorter as a whole. Since hey, if she was going to be a boring main protagonist, we've got to make the supporting cast at least somewhat interesting. Guilty Crown has some very standout characters, in particular Guy, Minori and Ayase, since Guy feels very similar to Lelouch as being a leader of a resistance movement and being more focused on the result of his actions rather than the methods and moral compass, while at the same time being able to inspire his followers since he is charming and charismatic. So like Lelouch, there's quite a bit of depth to his character, and in all honesty, he feels more like the main character than Shu does. Inori is very much the CC of the series, as she is a very mysterious and mystical character whose arcs are more focused on her backstory and the events surrounding Lost Christmas. Overall, I think she's a good character. Ayase really stood out to me, and I thought she was a very strong character, alongside her being a badass. Despite the fact that she's a paraplegic, she doesn't let that get her down and tries to do everything by herself in order to show that she isn't helpless and weak, but by the end of the series, learns that having others help you isn't a sign of weakness, and she's actually my favourite character from the series. Other characters like Tsumugi, Argo, Hare, Kanon, Daryl, and Dan the Man are characters I like as well, and overall I think Guilty Crown has a strong cast of supporting characters, though there are some characters I don't like Yahiro and Sota. But in the end, I'm giving it to Code Geass once again. Why? Because goddammit, Code Geass has Shirley in it, and I fucking love Shirley. This may seem odd to some since she's not nearly as important as other characters like Carlin or CC, but I can't help but love Shirley, and while she may not have a major bearing on the plot, she does have a major effect on Lelouch's character, and the episodes focused on her are definitely some of the stronger episodes of Code Geass. Shirley herself is a very sweet and kind-hearted girl, as well as being very upbeat and going out of her way to make others feel accepted. Shirley has a crush on Lelouch, and more often than not gets irritated when he hangs up on her or is seen with another girl. How Shirley affects Lelouch's character is that more often than not the result of his actions while gaining him victory and success often cause Shirley to suffer as a result of said actions, and when he realizes this, he begins to contemplate himself and feel remorse for what he's done, and whenever he's around Shirley, he feels the most human, and I feel it's thanks to Shirley that through her Lelouch still has ties to his humanity rather than just being an evil tyrant, and it's because of this that I consider Lelouch to be an anti-hero rather than a villain. Plus I totally ship these two 100%. So close call, but once again, the winner of this round is Code Geass, for having the overall stronger and more memorable cast of characters. In terms of animation, both of these animes looked incredible at the time they were released, and to this day I still think they hold up incredibly well. The animation in both these shows is smooth, clean, fluid, vibrant and consistent throughout. The backgrounds are nicely detailed, and overall both anime look incredible and are a visual treat. In terms of the art style however, that's where I have to side with Guilty Crown. Guilty Crown has a very strong art style, and the way it incorporates CGI helps make the show look visually unique and adds a lot to the overall atmosphere and tone of each scene. In particular, the scenes where Shu uses someone's void look fantastic, and the way the void envelops the surrounding area in an almost crystal-like aura is a visual treat for the eyes. Plus, I really like the mechs in this anime, or Endlaves if you will, since they remind me a lot of the orbital frames in Zone of the Enders, and I think the decision to make them 3D helps them to stand out and almost look surreal. Not to mention, I feel Guilty Crown has overall better lighting and atmosphere than Code Geass does, and overall Guilty Crown is one of the most visually impressive animes I've ever seen. Code Geass' art style is always something that's bugged the hell out of me, and for one reason or another is one of my major issues with the show. Now there are aspects of Code Geass' art style which I like, since I think the Nightmare frames are some of the slickest and all around coolest looking mechs in all of anime, and I feel Code Geass is very bright and a very vibrant anime, and I wouldn't say the art style is ugly or unappealing. The thing that I don't like about the way Code Geass looks is that I feel it's so generic looking even for anime standards. Now some of you may be confused by this, since many people complain that all animes look the same, or at least incredibly similar. But with Code Geass, its art style just looks so common when compared to other anime, and it bugs the hell out of me, especially since the characters, aside from a few of them, they all look like characters I've seen in other anime at some point. I mean, let's take other animes like Attack on Titan for example. Yes, you can say it looks generic, but it has very heavy outlines surrounding the characters and a very brown and washed out colour palette and tone in order to make it visually distinct. Death Note goes for a much more photorealistic look with its characters and environment, as well as putting much more emphasis on the lighting and shadows. Fullmetal Alchemist has a much more rounded and smoother look for the character designs and very sketchy backgrounds in order to make the characters stand out more, as well as emphasize the use of alchemy used throughout the show. All of these anime, while looking generic at first glance, have their own unique styles to them that help them stand out. Code Geass doesn't have this, and the way the show looks has always bugged me in retrospect. Call it a nitpick if you will, but that's just how I feel. In terms of action, again I think Guilty Crown is better, since the mech fights that are in the show are a lot more down to earth than most mecha anime, and you really feel the weight of each punch thrown. Not to mention, the use of voids helps add a lot of flavour to each fight scene, allowing for a lot of unique and creative action scenes with all the different powers Shu can utilise. Guilty Crown also has more variety in terms of action, since you get mech fights, fist fights, sword fights and so on. So yeah, action is something Guilty Crown definitely delivers on. Code Geass has some very strong action scenes and mech battles. In the first season only. Yeah, the action scenes in Code Geass in my opinion got worse as the series went on, and this was down to the fact that, like Gigguk said in his review of Season 2, Code Geass eventually succumbs to Gundam disorder. This is because in the first season, the fight scenes were more about battle strategies and tactics, and how the opposing side would use various methods to fight and win battles. These action scenes were great since you felt that everyone was on an even playing field, and each person had a job to do, and even the strongest Nightmare frames couldn't win by themselves, which made these fights all the more engaging. In Season 2, the Nightmare frames eventually get upgraded to the point in which they can simply wipe out any other unit that isn't plot important with a super gigantic laser beam, and most of the fights end up being one-on-one sky battles with the same mechs over and over again. On a side note, both of these shows are infamous for having really bad use of fan service used throughout most if not all the episodes. But not in the sense of it's everywhere and the female characters are practically naked all the time, but rather the fan service is used during most of the fight scenes and the more serious moments of the story, and it ends up being incredibly distracting. Out of the two, I think Code Geass is worse than Guilty Crown, since even though Guilty Crown is arguably more distracting during the fight scenes, Guilty Crown has far less fan service and it's far less forced compared to Code Geass, which really doesn't know where to draw the line sometimes. I mean, just count the number of times the camera is pointed directly up Carlin's ass, and by the time you're done, Fire Emblem Fates will be released in Europe. In the end, while both of these shows are animated beautifully and hold up even to this day, Guilty Crown is visually stronger thanks to its atmosphere, action scenes, lighting and use of 3D. So the winner of this round is Guilty Crown. Guilty Crown wins this round hands down. Say what you want about Guilty Crown, but the one thing that everyone can agree on is that the music in Guilty Crown is fantastic and easily the best part of the show. The soundtrack was composed by, and sorry if I mispronounced this, Hiroyuki Sawano, who was responsible for composing the soundtracks for anime such as Attack on Titan, Kill la Kill, Seraph of the End, and so on, as well as video games like Xenoblade Chronicles X. The soundtrack to Guilty Crown is just so epic and adds so much to the show's already outstanding atmosphere, and even on its own, the songs in the anime are just so awesome to listen to. From the opening song My Dearest to the epicness that is BIOS, to the beauty of Release My Soul, the entire soundtrack is just a joy to listen to, and the soundtrack itself has so much variety to it that every piece of music fits the situation perfectly. Not to put Code Geass down or anything, since I feel Code Geass has an overall strong soundtrack, but it doesn't compare to Guilty Crown's, since while the soundtrack does help to the atmosphere and drama of the story, by themselves the songs aren't nearly as powerful and become kind of forgettable. Also, I'm not a fan of most of the opening songs this show has, since even though the first opening song, Colors, is an amazing song and one of my favourite anime opening songs, the rest of them I'm either indifferent to or just do not care about. And also there's this. Oh god, make it stop! Please make the horrible music go away! Please, my ears! Oh! Yeah, I'm not a big fan of the second opening. One last thing I'd like to talk about is the dub. Overall, both shows have good dubs, and all the actors do their jobs well and they fit the characters just fine. But special mention goes to Johnny Young Bosch as the Lelouch, since he brings so much malice and charisma to the character, and the voice itself fits him perfectly. In fact, I think Lelouch and Vaster Stampede from Trigun are Bosch's best performances. So in the end, no competition here, Guilty Crown wins this round by a landslide. Okay, I need to explain what the point of this segment is, since I plan to use it in other anime related countdowns. When I say structure and pacing, I'm referring to how the anime flows in terms of story and narrative, as well as things like whether or not the anime is a mix of hit or miss episodes or is constantly good throughout the show, if the show drags for too long, if certain bits are rushed, whether certain parts of the anime don't add to the overall story, whether certain parts come out of nowhere, you know, all that stuff. In this case, both Code Geass and Guilty Crown have structurally sound narratives that flow at a constant pace throughout the show. Both these animes have some of the best first episodes in any anime I've seen, and from the beginning to the end, neither anime drag, and the overall quality between each episode is kept relatively the same, so there isn't a point in which certain episodes aren't worth watching or drag the anime down. With that said, both these shows do have some problems concerning the pacing however. When it comes to Code Geass, there are certain episodes of the anime which focus more on Lelouch's life as high school and high school antics as a whole. While these episodes aren't bad, and there really aren't that many of them as a whole, they really don't add anything to this anime, and most of the time they feel out of place when you consider they're focusing on things like chasing a cat or having a high school festival. And yes, while they do lead to some strong character moments, overall they're not really needed. Not bad per se, but not exactly good either, but rather they feel like pointless and unnecessary filler. But as bad as that is, Guilty Crown is much worse in terms of pacing because of the ending. Guilty Crown's ending isn't bad in the sense that it leaves so many loose ends not resolved, or leaves the anime on a cliffhanger, but rather the ending feels really rushed and anticlimactic. Seriously, the ending of this show, while satisfying in the sense that there is closure, left me scratching my head at some of the events that took place at the end, as well as how quickly certain plot threads were wrapped up, especially since most of them have been built up really well throughout the anime. This made it all the more confusing by the fact that Guilty Crown is only 22 episodes long, which for an anime is rather odd since the majority of anime are around either 24 or 26 episodes long. I feel like adding 2 if not 4 more episodes to this anime would have helped make the ending feel more complete and overall satisfying, and I'm not sure why they decided to stop at 22. It seemed like an overall dumb decision, and in the end they ended up shooting themselves in the foot because of this. So in the end, both animes have good pacing and structure, and no one episode is something I would consider bad. However, Guilty Crown suffers from a rushed and avoid anticlimactic ending, so the winner of the final round is Code Geass. In the end, both of these animes are great animes, and some of the most unique and original animes in the sci-fi, mecha, and fantasy genre. Both of these animes have many positive aspects to them despite having some flaws, and are still anime I recommend fans of mecha, sci-fi, or fantasy anime should definitely watch. Guilty Crown is certainly the better looking and sounding anime, thanks to its fantastic soundtrack and beautiful art style and animation, as well as having a lot of creativity and imagination put into the action scenes. But looks aren't everything, since both the story and characters are much stronger in Code Geass, as well as the anime having overall better pacing and a more consistent and flowing narrative, since the key aspects of any anime, or even any form of fiction, are its story and characters, and in this case Code Geass comes out on top. And as such, the winner of this episode of 3FORALL and the overall better anime of the two is Code Geass, Lelouch of the Rebellion. Thank you all for joining me on this episode of 3FORALL. I have been Crashix500, and I hope you all enjoyed my first anime related episode of 3FORALL. I look forward to doing more of these in the future, and without further ado, I wish you all a great night, take care, and I'll see you all next time.